part 2 of our half-hull modeling series, we're going to model the famous Herreshoff 12.5 footer. So I've got 3 objectives that I'd like to meet during this video. And the first is to show how you can take boat plans of any boat and make a half-hull model out of it. That way you can either make a half-hull model of a boat that you really admire, maybe a boat that you owned, or simply a boat that you're thinking that you might want to build in the future. So that was the first thing that I want to do. And the second is I want to show how you can scale down the drawings to fit different size lifts that are in the model. And then the final thing is that I want to show how you can include a waterline into the model like I did here. And this actually happens to be a piece of Aspen, and the main part of the model is Honduras Mahogany. So we started with our intermediate model of a Herreshoff 12.5. So what I have here are some plans I purchased from the Mystic Seaport. And this is lines that they took off of a boat that they have in their collection, and the boat is called Nettle. So what we have here are the line drawings for the boat. Now there are 3 lines, and all 3 are expressed in 3 different views. And those 3 views are the body plan, the half-breadth plan, and the profile plan. So the 3 lines, the first line is the waterline. And we all understand that the waterline is basically lines that are parallel to the surface of the water. So if you think of it as lines of a layer cake. So the next line would be the station lines. And the station lines, which are here, and they divide the boat as though it was a slice of bread, if you think of a loaf of bread being sliced. And then the third line is called a buttock line. And a buttock line runs from the center of the boat, and there are multiple lines of those. So they run out like this. Now, all 3 lines are expressed, as I said, in all 3 views. So in the body plan, we have the station lines, which are curved. We have the water lines, and we have the buttock lines. All 3 lines are expressed in the half-breadth, and we have, again, we have the buttock lines, we have the station lines, and we have the water lines that are these curved lines here. And then finally in the profile, we have, again, all 3 lines, which are the station lines, which are here, the water lines, which are this way, and then the buttock lines, which are expressed in these curved lines here. So what I want to do is to show how you can make some lift patterns off of actual boat plans. Now, as I had mentioned, these plans are drawn at 1.5 inches to equals 1 foot. And what that means then is that it ends up that the water lines that are here are exactly 3/4 of an inch apart. Now what I'd like to do is to reduce the size of this. So the model, or the plans here are something like, it's pretty close to 24 inches, something like that. And I'd like to reduce it down so it's a little closer to maybe 20 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce these 3/4 inch water lines down to 5/8 of an inch. And by doing that, then what I did was I shrunk everything down. And I did that on a copy machine and made copies, which are here. So now on these copies, you can see I've already spray mounted them to a piece of poster board. So now if we measure between the water lines, we've got 5/8 of an inch. So to make our lifts, most of them, all of these water lines, are right here, which we'll be able to just cut those out. But there's a couple of issues about the actual way the boat is drawn. Now, one is that here at waterline 6, there's more than 5/8 of an inch. So if I go up here 5/8 of an inch right there and make a mark. So now what I've done is I've added another water line right here. Now we have all of our lifts, all of the water lines going down to water line 1, which is right here. And from the way that this boat is designed is that here at the curve of the rabbet of the boat, this part is pretty much straight. Now, what that means for laying this out is our very last lift would be from this water line down. Now you can see they have a water line that they call waterline X. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down 5/8 of an inch and put another water line in right there. So this part of the keel is much like the skeg that was on the first model that we did. So it is, and I can tell up here, if I measure waterline X, it's just about 1/4 of an inch wide. So I'm going to treat this part of the keel as a separate piece and not as a piece of lift. So I'll add that on separately. So what I'll do is I'll cut a little 1/4 inch thick piece and then cut out that profile. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the profile of the boat, and then we'll be able to start working on the water lines. Before I do that, I want to number all of the where each lift will go. So the first lift is this new one that we created, so we're going to call that lift 1. And then we're going to just start working our way down. So here's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then we've got one more. Is that right? Yep, one more. So we have 8. So if we go up here and we number them, so our lift 1, which ends right here, so it's about there. So this will be lift 1, and 1 and 2 are the same because they actually use the shear line as the outline. So this line here is where our lift will be. That's the pattern. So in each case, we're always going, the lift is going that side of the line. So lift 2 starts here, and so forth and so on as we move down like that. So the first lift is here, and so then this is the second lift, and third, fourth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the profile. And wherever there's a straight line, I like to use a straight edge. So that's the last cut. What I want to do is I'm going to put some red lines in here so that we can distinguish where the loaded water line. I'm going to make a red line there so that I have it as a reference point. And then the next one is the one that we added down here, there. So as a refresher, this part will be our 1/4 of an inch piece for our keel. And what I'm going to do here at the water line, as you saw in the finished model, is I'm going to add a little, probably 1/8 of an inch strip in there of a contrasting wood to actually have a water line show on the model. So What we need to do first now is to take these water lines here and make patterns for them. So the way I'm going to do that is I've got a piece of poster board here, and the first one we want is number 1 right here. So I'm going to use the actual edge of the poster board as a reference, like this. And it looks like it comes over at least to station 3. So 1, 2, 3. So it comes over at 3. So we'll go over to 4 right here. So that is lift 1. Now the next one, lift number 2. And like I said before, it goes the entire shear.
Now that was actually incorrect. Lift 2 only goes over to station 10. I caught this mistake later as I was laying out the lifts on the lumber. I then made reference marks at stations 3, 13, and 21. And I did this on all of the lifts so that once we got it glued up, we could get them all in registration with each other.
So our next lift is 3, and 3 goes all the way back and even with the shear line. So to get that lift cut, we will simply take a pair of scissors and cut on that line. Now we can mark out lift number 3. Now we need to follow our lift number 4, which is this line here, and it cuts back to right here. So this is 4 here. Now we can draw out lift number 4. All right, so you can kind of see that process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep trimming this down to each lift and mark them out on my page. The final pattern we need is the keel. And that red line that I drew, I'm going to line that up with the edge of the paper. And then this will be the pattern for our keel. Now I've got all of my lifts drawn out. The next thing to do is to get them all cut out. So now I've got all of my lifts patterns made. So now the next thing to do is to get some stock and to mill it down to 5/8 of an inch. I can see I've got all of my lifts laid out now on my piece of stock here. One of the things that I was able to do in arranging these is that I was able to miss this sort of, looks like a knot or some kind of spot. But anyway, I was able to miss it by arranging the lifts that way. The other thing that I came across was that lift number 2 did not need to be all the way over. So I cut it off short, and it is right here where it cuts short like that. So the next step is to trace them out onto the timber and then cut it out on the bandsaw and get ready for the glue up. I've got all of my lifts trimmed up now. Now the piece of wood that we're going to put in for the water line, which is right here, which is called the loaded water line, sometimes denoted as LWL. Usually the painted water line is above the loaded water line. So I took some Aspen, and I'm using Aspen because it's kind of a grain neutral wood, and I glued it to lift number 5. Now once that dried overnight, I then trimmed it off with the bandsaw, and then I ran it through the surface planer so that I planed down the Aspen so that it was, I think, probably just a little bit over 1/8 of an inch. And then flipped it over and then planed down the entire piece so that it was exactly 5/8 of an inch. So now I've got that all finished. So what we can do now is to check our lifts. So it's always a good idea to put all of them on the profile view so that you make sure that they're long enough, longer than the profile. So we'll put lift number 5 here, which is where I've got that piece of Aspen glued in there. And then what we'll do is just kind of check to make sure all of these lifts will fit in there properly. And then the final piece down here is where the keel goes, which is about 3/8 of an inch thick. And then this would be lift 4 here, and lift 3, and 2, and 1. So now that we've got all of that checked out, we can, this one actually needs to be over a little bit like that. So now we've got that all checked out, we can get it glued up. So we're getting ready to glue our lifts together. So I like to use nails to hold them in registration. That's my preferred method as opposed to using that jig that I showed in the first half haul. And I had mentioned in a past video that I am using this brad nailer, and it uses these little plastic nails. And the nice thing about that is then if a chisel hits it or something like that, it won't damage the chisel. But I like to use nails to keep those lifts in registration. This particular nail gun, brad nailer I should call it, is made by Raptor. And I will, I'll put a link in the description. Now, the plastic nails only work in their gun. It will not work in a traditional brad nailer. So to get started, I'm going to start with lift number 3 right here. And we're going to put lift number 4 on top of that. So I always like to put a piece of plastic down here so the glue won't stick to it, the bench. So we get some glue out. So what we do is we line these up. Now remember, I've always put these little registration marks right here. The glue is very slippery. So we get that lined up. And I put a nail in the back here because I'll be carving out on this edge. We'll get one out here. Okay, and then the next lift is number 5, which goes right here. So I'm going to continue on doing this until I get it all glued up and nailed. right, that looks like it's a pretty good glue up. I will glue the rudder piece on there afterwards. So now we'll let this sit for overnight so we can carve it tomorrow. If you saw the earlier video on my making of the half hull for the dinghy, you saw that I took the offcuts and hot glued them on. And in this case, I didn't have the offcuts, so I cut some scrap plywood and hot glued 2 pieces on there so that it would be nice and stable when I ran it through the bandsaw. So now I've got it all stable here, and the next thing to do is to take the pattern, the profile pattern, and line it up. You can see here's the waterline here and the waterline here. So I'll line that up and get it marked out. Now I'll take this over in the bandsaw and get that profile cut out. Now that I have the profile cut out and trimmed up, I'm going to start by cleaning up the shear line here. And one of the best tools to do that with is a compass plane. And compass plane, you can change the radius of the sole. So by turning this knob, you can make it concave or convex. So I can put this on here and kind of get the curvature that I want, and then I can just start planing away. Now that I've got the shear all cleaned up and ferreted out, I can now put this little carving block on here so I can hold it in the vise. So the next part is the fun part, where I start to carve it and to shape the contour of it. And as I had said in the previous model, what I need to do is basically keep these grooves in here and make it all blend together. Well, that's it for our 12.5 footer. Now, if any of you would like to build this model, I'm going to make the patterns for the lifts available on my Patreon account so that you'll be able to download those for free. Now, in our third part of our series, which will be the advanced half-hull modeling, I'm going to tackle one of my favorite boats, and that is the Dark Harbor. So I hope you'll join me for that episode. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and remember, if you're going to make it beautiful.